North Sumatra, Indonesia, we have Monan Saleh, who is the Director of Resource Mobilization with the Indigenous Peoples Alliance of the Archipelago, or AMAN. AMAN represents over 17,000 individuals coming from 2,366 indigenous communities across Indonesia, and they work at the local, national, and international level to advocate for the prosperity of the peoples of Indonesia. Next to Manang is Cesar Aguirre, who comes from California's Central Valley. Cesar comes from a family of community organizers and was introduced to advocacy at a really young age. He works in rural communities in Kern County, which is the area in and around Bakersfield. And he works with fence-line communities who are affected by the oil, gas, and agricultural industries to understand how to protect themselves from the pollutants of those industries. For those that don't know, and I didn't know before talking to Cesar, but Kern County is the third largest producer of oil in the country. So it is a huge source when we talk about the oil and gas industry. So much of that is focused in the county where Cesar works. And then we have Marcia Ishii-Eiteman, who is a senior scientist for Pesticide Action Network and director of the grassroots science program there. She has worked previously for over 12 years to develop farmer field schools and ecological pest management and sustainable agriculture and community-based rural development projects in Southeast Asia and Africa. She's written extensively on the ecological, social, and political dimensions of food and agriculture, and was a lead author of the UN-sponsored International Assessment of Agricultural Knowledge, Science, and Technology for Development. And last but certainly not least is Lindsey Allen, the Executive Director of Rainforest Action Network, who has more than a decade of experience pressuring and inspiring some of the world's largest corporations to protect rainforests, human rights, and the climate. She is a veteran environmental and social justice organizer and has spent her career preventing commodity expansion into globally critical forest areas. She's also played a central role in achieving some of the most significant corporate policies to protect forests over the past decade. And it's not included on her formal bio, but I know Lindsay to also be an excellent boss. And not with us in the room today, but also on the panel, as Malachi noted, are the Pama workers who we will hear from in just a minute when we play the film. But we wanted to bring their stories into the room and connect them to the situations that are happening here in California as well. So with that, we will watch the other side of deforestation and then talk a little more from the panel.
Saya bekerja di sebuah perusahaan swasta di Kabupaten Nusantara. Saya bekerja sebagai immersive. Dari mulai nenek dulu capek, kemudian orang saya itu sama sekali tidak sebenarnya.
It's probably in every room of your house, even though you may have never heard of it. Palm oil is the most widely used vegetable oil in the world, found in everything from toothpaste to laundry detergent, cookies and crackers, to peanut butter and ice cream. The growing demand for palm oil is one of the leading drivers of tropical deforestation today. And as the largest global producer of palm oil, Indonesia has paid a high price. Over the last few decades, the huge demand for palm oil has destroyed much of Indonesia's rainforests. and the key species that live in them, like orangutans, tigers, and elephants. Once the forests fall, rows and rows of palm oil trees take their place. Standing on the ground, these massive palm oil plantations feel endless, stretching out for miles as far as the eye can see. Palm oil plantations have swallowed whole communities inside of them, erasing local livelihoods or any other option for work. On the other side of deforestation are generations of palm oil workers left to face the ongoing devastation.
Kita bekerja, kita menghasilkan hasil yang sudah maksimal yang sesuai dengan perusahaan mendapat perlindungan yang lebih, tapi kita tidak pernah diberikan. Kerja di sini tuh, bebannya sangat berat lah. Basic tinggi, premier rendah.
Labor abuses are sadly widespread in the palm oil industry. Everything from child labor, human trafficking, and modern-day slavery to poverty wages, toxic working conditions, and union busting have been documented on plantations. Living in remote areas often totally controlled by palm oil companies, workers have few chances to tell their stories. In a series of groundbreaking reports, Rainforest Action Network, the International Labor Rights Forum, and OPUC, an Indonesian labor rights group, worked together to document the conditions on a few plantations owned by a company called Indofood, the joint venture partner of global snack food giant Pepsico. Indofood is a massive food company in Indonesia and the sole maker of Pepsico-branded products in the country. Indofood plantations provide the global market with palm oil, the same palm oil that ends up in the products in our homes. And unfortunately, the exploitation and abuse uncovered on Indofood's plantations is all too common across the palm oil industry. A common practice at Indofood's plantations is to set an unattainably high quota for how much palm oil fruit a harvester is expected to cut in a day. But if a harvester doesn't meet the daily quota, they won't be paid the already low daily wage and risk losing their jobs. Harvesters are forced to bring helpers to work with them, who are either unpaid or paid out of the harvester's own wages. To make ends meet, it's often the wives and children of the harvesters who come to work. With no formal agreement with Indofood, these unpaid workers face exploitation and abuse. S, a casual worker who has been helping her harvester husband collect and haul palm oil fruit for 7 years, spoke with researchers.
Enggak lah, kita ya ikut sekedar bantu suami aja. Kenapa kita mau ikut berondol? Karena keadaan memaksa. Kayak gini kalau kita nggak bantu, pulangnya nanti lama. Bisa aja sih kerja sendiri, berapa dapatnya gitu. Tapi nanti nggak dapat basic. Atasan itu selalu nekan, kenapa nggak dapet? Nanti selalu pakai ancaman-ancaman, yang mau dipindah-pindahkan. Jadi udah mau nggak mau ya kita ikut bantu walaupun kita itu nggak dibayar. Terkadang kalau suaminya lama ngekirnya, kita bantu naksir. Cuma sekarang karena mungkin udah kelamaan itu ya, perutnya sering sakit, jadi kadang nggak kuat lagi, cuma bulan-bulan aja.
Casual women workers in particular perform some of the most dangerous work on the plantation, often dealing with hazardous pesticides and fertilizers on a daily basis. Due to their casual work status, they are denied job security, proper health care and insurance, or a pension plan to retire comfortably after their years of service. Women casual workers who work to help their harvester husbands are not recognized at all for their contribution, as they do not have a direct working relationship with the company and work without pay. A has been a casual maintenance worker at one Indofood-owned plantation for 5 years. She regularly sprays pesticides and is unaware of which pesticides she is exposed to. She also gets her blood tested by the company, but is not informed of the results. She told researchers,
Laki-laki lah yang nyangkut, kita hanya ngerjakan ngasih obat, ngasih dosisnya segini tinggi, seperti apa, itu kan laki-laki. Kami semua nggak tahu, itu kan musuh sendiri gitu. Kami udah dituang ke camp, itu kami kerja. Kalau obatnya sekian dosis yang tingginya, nggak tahu gitu. Kami sering dicek, enam bulan sekali dicek, cuma belum kita kasih tahu hasilnya. Apakah berbahaya, ada penyakit, kasih tahu. Kami di situ kasih apa dicek juga diambil tes kesehatannya kan diambil tinggi kami, diambil darahnya. Semua belum kasih tahu hasilnya gitu. Ya udah kami minta kalau kamu di tes kesehatan karena kami meracun itu aja lah kami minta tolong kasih tahu hasil kami itu aja lah. Jadi kami udah puas, jangan darah kami aja diambil tapi hasilnya nggak tahu.
The palm oil coming from Indofoods plantations is the same palm oil that's used to make the products that you and I buy every day. To make a quick profit, generations of Indofoods palm oil workers have been paid low wages, overworked, poisoned, and deprived of their basic rights. Through our collective effort, we can and must hold these corporations accountable. Indofood and its business partner Pepsico are profiting off of exploitation and deforestation. If we don't stop them, Pepsico and Indofood will continue to profit off of generations of conflict palm oil.
Dengan semangat, dengan niat kita untuk lebih baik, kalau bukan kita, siapa lagi? Kalau tidak, sekarang kapan lagi?
So one of the things that sticks in my mind after watching the film is the idea of palm oil plantations that swallow whole communities inside of them. They are so large that they really do on the ground feel like they could go on forever. Cesar, I'm wondering if you, and then whoever else would like to speak to this, I'm wondering if you could share more about the work that you do in communities in Kern County, and what similarities or differences do you see in Kern County to the film we just watched?
When it comes to, the parallels of how they're treated and the outcomes of their work, it's very similar. The highest is demanded of them while the lowest is given to them, right? If you look at the labor laws for farm workers here in California, they have to work more hours for them to get time and a half. They have less break time than people who work, office jobs, which makes less sense to me, right? Here in California, they have water and shade available, but that's because incredible movement, social justice movements in the 60s and 70s laid the platform to allow that to happen in California. In other states, they still don't have water, they still don't have shade, and what we would consider a basic human right, something that's a necessity to that company, it's an expenditure. And it's an expenditure that they can avoid, right? So when we look at the way that the plantation workers in Indonesia are getting treated, they're being used as a person to reach a quota. And when you look at farm workers from the Central Valley, they're doing the same thing, right? Tenemos que llenar tantas cajas antes de que nos vayamos. We have to fill this many boxes before we go. And especially when it's in the middle of the season, you wake up at 3 a.m. to be there by 4:30, you come home at 5, you take a shower, and then you go back because at night there's more work to do. And if you don't do it, somebody else will. And if you don't go, somebody's going to replace you the next morning. There's very little telling you that you're important to them. It's more, we need you because you're a source of labor, not because you're important to us. And the source of labor is very replaceable. And they make them feel that, right? They keep that fear in their heart to say, if you don't do this for us, then your source of income is gone. And that fear keeps them paralyzed because without that source of income, they're not going to be able to help themselves here or their family. A lot of people send money back in Mexico. And if there's family that depends on them not only here but across the border, then they wouldn't take the risk, They won't take the risk of questioning their bosses or asking questions because then that would raise concerns in the eyes of their superiors, right? So when we see people not knowing the doses that they're spraying, and we compare that here in California, there's required training for pesticide that has to be done. And when you talk to community members, people that work in the, people that are farm workers, not all of them, but some of them, you walk up to them and you ask them, hey, have you had this pesticide safety training? Oh, I signed a paper. Did you do a training? Oh, I signed a paper. Did your boss say this? No, I didn't know. Is it harmful? Am I safe? What are the effects, you know? And for someone who works in that and has worked in that for decades, they should be familiar with the effects. They should know what the dangers of that are. They shouldn't be wondering, what is this and how can it affect me? You know, they shouldn't take their dirty clothes back home for it to be washed in the family washer, and then everyone in the family has to deal with the repercussions of companies cutting corners for profit. So there's a lot of parallels, and even in a state that we say, you know, is a leader in the world, there's loopholes, there's ways to get around it, and there's similarities, and it's important to highlight those because at the end of the day, even though it's a different geological location with different politics, the end goal of these companies is still the same, it's still profit. And we need to see where they're cutting corners, and you know, the similarities are endless when it comes to here in the Valley and in this video. So I think it's very important that you highlighted that.
Thank you. Another thing that sticks in my mind is the first palm oil worker we hear from, who says that even though his family has been working on the palm oil plantation for generations, they've never profited from that. And what comes to my mind is the often used argument in support of these industries, which is that they bring prosperity, they bring jobs to rural communities, and maybe provide the only livelihood there. So Manong, I'm wondering if you can talk to us about what the real impacts of the palm oil industry is for communities in Indonesia.
Yeah. Thank you. I speak in Bahasa, so my colleagues is translate to English. Pertama, saya ingin menyapa leluhur saya dan teman-teman saya yang hilang akibat dari perkebunan skala besar.
First of all, I would like, my name is Mona, or Arifin Saleh from Indonesia. First of all, I would like to pray for a moment to bring me back to my colleague who have lost their territory due to this industry.
Ahoy!
Ahoy!
Ya, perkebunan skala besar itu menghilangkan tidak hanya makanan-makanan yang kami punya, tidak hanya hutan-hutan yang baik sebagai supermarket dan apotik bagi kami masyarakat adat, tapi juga menghilangkan kebudayaan dan ritual-ritual yang kami punya terhadap wilayah adat yang dirampas oleh perkebunan skala besar.
So the large-scale company not only take our forest, our supermarket as indigenous peoples, our source of livelihood, our food, but also take away our culture from us, our rituals, our way of life.
Di wilayah adat saya adalah generasi yang banyak kehilangan atas kebudayaan yang kami miliki. Saya bersama dengan teman-teman kehilangan atas ritual-ritual yang dipraktekkan oleh leluhur-leluhur kami, dan itu hanya berlangsung 70 tahun ketika perkebunan skala besar mengambil hutan-hutan kami dan tanah-tanah kami.
In my community, I and my friends are actually the lost generation. We currently cannot practice our rituals because our lands are taken. We cannot practice our way of life.
Perkebunan skala besar atau pemerintah mengatakan bahwa kalau tanah kami dikelola, maka akan mendatangkan kesejahteraan, akan mendatangkan sumber pendapatan, akan mendatangkan orang-orang bisa bekerja di perusahaan dan merubah hidupnya.
Large-scale companies and governments always have excuses. For example, they say that the industry can provide the community with employment, a new source of livelihood, and also give prosperity to the community.
Tapi fakta yang terjadi justru sebaliknya. Banyak kami yang kelaparan karena kami nggak bisa bekerja tanpa lahan. Kami tidak bisa bekerja di kota karena kami memang menghasilkan makanan, menghasilkan sumber pendapatan ekonomi kami dari lahan-lahan yang diambil oleh perkebunan.
But in fact, we cannot live without our lands because we take our food from our lands and we cannot go to the city and just work in the city because our life is in our territory. We have everything we need in our territory and it's available for us.
Dan ketika orang-orang tua kami berjuang untuk mempertahankan lahan, mempertahankan hutan-hutan kami yang sebagai sumber makanan kami, yang terjadi adalah kami malah ditangkapi, bahkan dibunuh. Dan tidak ada keadilan bagi kami untuk
So once we stand and fight back, we most of the time we're arrested, criminalized, we're put in jails, and there's no way to seek for justice. Almost no way to seek for justice.
Dan itu terus berlangsung hampir 70 tahun seperti yang saya alami, dan kami kehilangan orang-orang yang kami cintai. Kami kehilangan untuk mengenal di mana wilayah-wilayah kami. Kami kehilangan hewan-hewan buruan yang kami miliki. Kami kehilangan madu-madu yang dihasilkan dari hutan-hutan yang bagus. Dan kami kehilangan lebah-lebah kami yang selalu kami panggil dan bernyanyi.
It has been 70 years. We lost the source of our food. We lost our medicinal plants. We lost the honey, the bees, the animals that we used to hunt, and also all the resources available in our territories and forests.
Dan ketika kami generasi-generasi baru menyadari bahwa kami telah kehilangan wilayah adat kami, 10 tahun yang lalu saya bersama dengan teman-teman melakukan investigasi terhadap bagaimana minyak sawit yang dihasilkan dari kriminalisasi, dari perampasan atas kerusakan-kerusakan hutan kami. Dan sampai hari ini video yang kita tonton tidak ada berubah sama sekali.
So once the new generation, my generation, realized that this should not continue, we conducted investigation, and the results of our investigation, if we compare with the content of the video, nothing changed. It stayed the same.
Dan dampaknya yang sampai hari ini juga antara pekerja perusahaan yang juga tidak mendapatkan kesejahteraan itu justru konflik dengan masyarakat adat.
So the local community working for this industry has never prospered, and the worst thing that they have a horizontal conflict between the local communities and those working for the companies.
Dan konsesi-konsesi besar yang diberikan perusahaan, yang diberikan pemerintah kepada perusahaan sampai hari ini juga itu tidak mendatangkan kesejahteraan bagi masyarakat adat maupun pekerja.
So this industry, the big concession granted by the government to companies has never given us prosperity, has never given the community any profit.
Justru semakin meningkat kriminalisasi terhadap masyarakat adat. Justru semakin meningkat kehancuran hutan-hutan masyarakat adat.
The criminalization, the number of criminalization increased, and deforestation also worsened.
Komisi Nasional Hak Asasi Manusia di Indonesia melakukan national inquiry untuk membuktikan bahwa perkebunan skala besar ini itu melakukan tindakan pelanggaran HAM yang begitu dahsyat terhadap masyarakat adat.
The Indonesian National Human Rights Commission conducted national inquiry to prove that this large-scale industry has committed gross violation of human rights in Indonesia.
Dan Mahkamah Konstitusi di Republik Indonesia juga mengembalikan mengakui keberadaan masyarakat adat dan wilayah-wilayah adat termasuk hutan-hutan adat.
And the Constitutional Court also acknowledged the indigenous peoples and their territory by passing a Constitutional Court ruling.
Tapi perusahaan-perusahaan perkebunan skala besar kelapa sawit, seperti kelapa sawit, terus saja menghabisi dan merampas wilayah masyarakat adat. Sampai saya 2018 itu di Kalimantan Tengah, masyarakat adat yang menyelamatkan hutan-hutan adatnya justru dihabisin oleh perkebunan skala besar, terutama kelapa sawit.
And this large-scale company, especially palm oil, continue to deprive of indigenous peoples and local community of their territory. And it's also happened recently in central Kalimantan, in a community that is member to our organization.
Jadi itu fakta bahwa perkebunan skala besar itu tidak hanya cerita tentang kesejahteraan dan menghasilkan ekonomi, tapi perkebunan skala besar, terutama kelapa sawit, punya cerita bagaimana generasi bisa hilang akibat tanah-tanahnya dijadikan tanaman monokultur seperti kelapa sawit.
So we had heard a lot of stories about companies, palm oil companies, provide profit or improve the economy of a country. But on the other side, there is a story about the other impacts, negative impact of this industry, where a community or there's a loss of generation who don't know their roots because the land has been stolen from them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're seeing a similar trend around the world, as Manon touched on, the criminalization of indigenous and grassroots communities and environmental leaders. A crackdown on peaceful protest and a shrinking political space. That's certainly true in Indonesia, certainly true in the United States as well. So Marcia and Lindsay, I'm wondering if you both can speak to the work that your organizations do, and what, as GCAS is behind us and corporate solutions are being brought to the fore, what does corporate campaigning look like in our striving for climate justice?
Thank you. Well, first I want to thank brother here, Manon, for sharing your stories and for sharing the hardships of the plantation workers in Indonesia, and Cesar for the work you do with farm worker communities and rural communities in the Central Valley. As someone who works with Pesticide Action Network, which is a global network, we are seeing these kinds of violation of human rights all over the world, pretty much wherever industrial agriculture, corporate-controlled industrial agriculture has made inroads and has been successful in pressuring and transforming farmers' own subsistence and nourishing forms of agriculture into export-oriented or commodity crop production. So it's a global problem with global actors. I'm heartened by global movements, local movements that are building resistance and winning struggles bit by bit against these corporate behemoths. I do also want to add, I'll get to the corporate campaigning, but in terms of the pesticide impacts on farm workers here in California, everything Cesar says is absolutely true. I think people are not so aware, even here in California, the extent of the hardships that farm workers labor under. They don't have health insurance or job security, sick leave. So as we heard, if you are not well one day and you don't make it to work, you can lose your job. I've heard cases of this all over in Washington and Florida as well. And one thing that's been happening specifically related to climate change, with the increased temperatures we're experiencing here in the Central Valley, farm workers are actually dying here in California, in the fields, picking crops for us to eat due to heat stress, due to being forced to stay in the fields and pick crops in the midday sun. We have at least a death a year in recent years, young women, pregnant women dying here in California. So this is really a criminal situation. It should not be tolerated, and yet this is the reality that farm workers are laboring under every day to bring us food, such as the delicious food we just had. Or perhaps that food was sourced by local family farmers who have a different relationship with their workers. That's also possible, and that is one of the things that I think is hopeful, where we're building relationships between rural and urban communities, and urban communities are increasingly asking questions that I would say even a few years ago, when we would put the issue of workers' rights out there to the public for support, I could never understand this, but it was like one of the bottom of the list, in other words, of that like people would respond to. They would respond much more, and I understand concern about pesticides in your food, that you're feeding your kids, concern for the environment. All of these are critical things, but for some reason, the plight of farm workers didn't seem to really matter to many people in this country who eat the food of our workers. But I do believe that this is beginning to become more in our consciousness, more in the public conversation, and this is a very good thing. In terms of the corporate, getting back to the corporate campaigning, it's absolutely critical that we hold these corporations accountable. Monsanto, now owned by Bayer, but still Monsanto. It's still the same corporation, whether it's Monsanto, Bayer, Dow, or DuPont, or whether it's other corporations that are part of this industrial agriculture food chain. They need to be held accountable for, I would say, crimes against humanity, violations of workers' basic rights to health and livelihood. And globally, we had a few years ago a People's Permanent Tribunal, PAN International, put on and organized a People's Permanent Tribunal, a bit similar to what we were hearing, where we had a panel of international human rights judges who heard the cases brought forward from Africa, Latin America, Asia, North America, in which each of the big 6 corporations, which now there are just about 3, but Monsanto, Syngenta, Dow, DuPont, BASF, were charged with violations of human rights. And they were indeed found guilty of gross violations. They have yet to be held to account. We are gradually getting some progress. A recent lawsuit against Monsanto in the case of an individual who is dying of cancer. It's been linked to Monsanto's Roundup glyphosate product. There are many more lawsuits in the wings, many people seeking redress in the US and around the world for assaults on their life and livelihood. So it's really important to hold the corporations accountable by whatever means, whether it's shareholder resolutions or shaming the corporation, exposing what the corporation is doing. For us at PAN, we often target the public agencies which allow the corporations, these are our public agencies, institutions, and officials that allow the corporations to come in and destroy communities, come in and peddle their poisonous products. So our public agencies, our institutions and officials should be working to defend the public interest, to defend our lives and well-being. So what we try to do is expose the revolving door between whether it's Monsanto or Dow and the US Department of Agriculture, expose the influence and the readiness of the EPA to approve the latest suite of pesticides that are being produced by these corporations. It's seemingly endless, but one of the things that I think is really important for us all is to get involved and raise our voices, to be able to tell our elected officials or to tell candidates who are now running for office that you don't take money from corporations if you want my vote. You say no to Monsanto and Dow and DuPont. You say no to the cancer-causing, brain-harming pesticides that they are promoting. And when we speak together, when we organize together, we can have tremendous impact and power. So we have seen examples in California organizing by farm workers in the Central Valley or the Central Coast, working with PAN and others. We have I'll just briefly mention one approach we have is Drift Catcher, which is a tool that farm workers or rural communities, parents, teachers can use to actually monitor the pesticides in the air. So when communities are being exposed and pesticides are drifting off the fields into their homes, they can actually monitor, get air samples, work with PAN to determine what is in those air samples, and then bring that to really strengthen their community-based advocacy to demand change. In the past, without this kind of evidence, when workers have described the poisoning and the illnesses that they face, growers, the company doctor will often say, oh, just go home, say racist things like you ate a bad burrito, go away. And that's really not acceptable as adding yet another violation of human rights on top of everything else. So, but with this information, communities are able to prove and show, bring the evidence forward, and have a strong voice in demanding change. And so we have some improved regulations, been able to put some buffer zones, protections around schools, around sensitive sites, but there's a lot more work to be done.
Yeah, thank you. It's an honor to be on the panel with you all, and thank you all for coming. In terms of the importance, at Rainforest Action Network, we obviously, our tagline is challenge corporate power. We run campaigns on corporations that have run amok. And I would hark back to one of the comments that was made on the panel earlier by Cesar, who said, we are, I'm not going to quote you precisely, but who said essentially, we have a responsibility and an opportunity to not allow ourselves to be limited by what we think is possible. And I think that's important when we think about corporate power in companies. So we have been sold this idea that what we saw here, what's being talked about today, is business as usual, which is completely acceptable. And we should tolerate it, we should look the other way, we should buy the products, we should change our light bulbs, and then we should go to bed. And that is not something that we have to allow to happen. So what we do is we follow the money, we follow the products. When they leave the forest, we look at exactly where we're going, and we can say exactly which companies, we can name names on the companies that are making millions or billions of dollars a year in profits at the expense of communities as a result of labor violations, as a result of stealing lands from indigenous peoples, as a result of setting forests on fire and planting products like palm oil, which is now the cheapest vegetable oil in the world. So one example of this is Pepsico. We have been talking to Pepsico for years. They are, it's not just the Pepsi and the products that you would recognize as soda. They are one of the largest global snack food companies in the world. They use a massive amount of palm oil, and their joint venture partner is one of the worst companies that is still violating labor rights and exploiting workers in places like Indonesia. So the partner is Indofood. We have said to Pepsi for years now, this is completely unacceptable. And they turned around and said to us, aren't you going to be happy we have a policy that might mean we deforest a little bit less? And we said, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And we are only limited by our willingness to go back to them and say no. When they want us to say, your baby step is really going to make a difference, we can say no. Right? This is a matter of life and death when we're talking about climate change, and it's a matter of life and death when we are talking about people who every day have to bear the burden of allowing these companies, of producing the profit that these companies are extracting from people and communities. So there's tremendous power in our resistance to this corporate model. And we need to see more recognition of labor rights at the plantation level. We need workers to be able to have a voice in saying, this is too much, this is not acceptable, the right to organize collectively. And we need to see recognition of indigenous rights, right? These lands are, in most cases, stolen in the first place. And so these companies need to be recognizing the indigenous rights and not expanding into lands that are stolen. So that's our opportunity, is to echo those calls and force these companies to take action. Right now, Pepsi is a laggard, but they will move eventually, as long as we're unwilling to give up, which is the case.
So Lindsay, you might have just answered my next question, which is what gets you up in the morning, and maybe for you it's say no, the chance to say no to a multinational corporation. But to the whole panel, you know, in light of all that we're talking about here, what gets you up in the morning, what gives you hope, either in the communities that you work in or the campaigns that you're running, what keeps you going?
By far, what gives me the most energy, what makes me want to work harder than anything, is badass community members. That's what it is. When I go out in the community and I tell people, hey, there's this situation in your neighborhood, there's this situation in your job, there's this situation affecting your kids, and they say, where do I go? Where do I sign up? How early do I have to get up? How far do I have to drive? Those are the people that give me energy, you know? Because at the end of the day, if there was no money, I would still wake up and do what I'm doing now, because I get to help those people. I get to help the people that want to help themselves, and I give them the opportunity, the tools, and, you know, the target to be able to better their lives in a long-term manner, right? So what gets me up in the morning is remembering I have to go to Shafter for Annabelle so she can take an air sample within the community garden. Or I have to go to Lost Hills with Saul Ruiz so he can, you know, talk smack about the refinery that's a quarter mile from his kids' schools. That's what gets me up in the morning, not, you know, not so much the action, but watching people be part of the action and giving them the avenue to be able to fight for themselves. Sorry for my English.
Ya, di dunia ini kami bersama dengan teman-teman masyarakat adat dan orang-orang tua meyakini bahwa sedikit orang yang memang rakus dan tidak pernah puas, tapi ada begitu banyak orang yang berperilaku baik tapi dia tidak tahu.
So I believe that we believe, the indigenous peoples leaders believe that there are some greedy people, but there are many people that are still have a good heart.
Jadi cerita-cerita yang seperti yang saya bawakan tadi, kesaksian yang seperti terjadi lewat video, bagaimana kerusakan hutan yang terjadi, bagaimana masyarakat adat kehilangan makanan-makanannya. Jadi orang-orang baik yang punya duit dan berinvestasi di bank-bank yang menghancurkan wilayah-wilayah masyarakat adat, maka tariklah duit itu.
So seeing the video testimony and also the stories from the panels, we know that many rich people, they deposit their money in a bank, and also the bank that finance bad projects. So it is the time for us to take that money and direct the money to the issues that we work on.
Dan ketika pergi ke supermarket yang kita tahu bahwa makanan-makanan itu dihasilkan dari minyak kelapa sawit yang akibat perampasan lahan, akibat dari tindakan buruh-buruh yang tidak sejahtera, akibat dari hutan-hutan yang rusak, maka jangan dibeli itu makanan.
And last but not least, we have to be very careful when we go to supermarket and buy products. We have to make sure that the products is not generated from materials that from unethical and irresponsible practices. Dan kami meyakini masih ada perusahaan-perusahaan yang mungkin ketika masuk ke wilayah-wilayah adat, dia harus melakukan free, fair, informed consent terhadap masyarakat adat. Dia harus
mengakui dan melindungi wilayah-wilayah yang merupakan sumber kehidupan masyarakat adat.
And for companies who want to invest in indigenous peoples and local communities areas, they have to respect the free prior consents of indigenous peoples. They should seek for free prior consents of indigenous peoples and local community, and they have to recognize and respect the right of these people.
Dan mengajak pemerintah untuk berperilaku tidak korupsi, tidak berperilaku menipu perusahaan, karena perusahaan juga mau berusaha dengan baik, tanpa konflik, tanpa melakukan pelanggaran HAM. Jadi mendesak pemerintah untuk melakukan mengeluarkan kebijakan-kebijakan yang mengakui dan melindungi hak masyarakat adat.
And we should urge the government to issue policies that recognize and protect indigenous peoples and local community, and engage both government and companies to do their practices better.
Dan saatnya kita bersama untuk melawan tindakan perusahaan yang melakukan kriminalisasi terhadap masyarakat adat.
And we should fight those companies who criminalize indigenous people.
I think what gets me up in the morning, I would just like to refer to this sister who spoke earlier this afternoon or evening about when the eagle and the condor come together. And it's the voice of indigenous people rising around the world that gets me up in the morning, because that voice is so righteous and is so connected to the earth and to what we need to do, each and every one of us. There's no denying the call. For me, I hear the call of Mother Earth every day, and I see the heart and the love in people around me every day, and the courage of the workers and the family farmers and the peasant farmers and the parents who are just trying to give their kids a healthy life. And that beauty and power multiplied many-fold all around the world. We see it in the Central Valley, in Indonesia, in Kerala, India, which has just been devastated by immense flooding. That they've just put out a statement about how they are going to make their entire area carbon neutral through a whole series. Like, they figured it out, they're moving forward with it. And I see this at the local level, the creativity, the brilliance, the passion of people on the ground building solutions. That gets me up in the morning. What also gives me hope is knowing that despite all that is going down around us, there are solutions. People are building beautiful alternative worlds right now, in our midst. Sometimes it can feel pretty depressing at Pesticide Action Network, and I'm sure at RAD and all these other places where it just seems the daily news is get more bad decisions, more power by Monsanto, EPA approving yet another Monsanto GMO pesticide promoting GMO, but there are solutions that people are doing on the ground, whether it's alternative liberation of seeds out of the patents of the corporation, seed saving, library seed exchanges, people growing food and sharing, building community gardens, whether it's the intersectionality we've been seeing the last few days here in town. It's amazing at Soul to Soul or at the Women's Assembly, with connections being made between indigenous people's rights and gender rights and racial justice and climate justice. So I see this massive movement building all around the world, a righteous, powerful movement from the people, and that gives me great hope. And just to connect to climate change, a lot of us are in town for, knowing that deforestation and agriculture contributes up to 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions can be pretty daunting when you think of what's happening all around the world, but that also gives us the power to flip that and turn that picture all around. And we know, because farmers are doing this on the ground through agroecology, that is diversified ecological farming processes that can actually draw carbon out of the air and store it in the ground. We can reverse climate change. We can draw down enough and really transform the global system if we were to do this. Like, technically we can do this, and the technology is the knowledge of the peasant farmers, the family farmers that we already have. That can be amplified and developed in horizontal dialogue with ecological scientists. Our Latin American brothers and sisters call it diálogo de saberes, like dialogue of knowledge, sharing knowledge horizontally, not this top-down stuff, but really valuing, lifting up indigenous knowledge, millennia of knowledge, as well as the daily evolution, farmers experimenting, figuring out new ways of doing things, farmers working together alongside in partnership with workers, with urban communities. All of this, we can transform our food and farming system. There's no barriers to what we can do. And I guess what I would say also is just to encourage all of us to really drop the self-doubt and the buts and the like I can't, or how would I, I have this job, we all are living in the world we're in this capitalist economy. But what I found is that when you just really open your heart to the possibility of radical change without limiting yourself to but tomorrow I have to blah, 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 things will arise, magical, it will open up opportunities, you will meet people, the person next to you perhaps today. I have found that when I really let the barriers down, the self barriers, imposed barriers, and open up to the possibility of really radical change, transforming the world in the way that our indigenous brothers and sisters are holding forward for us, a path forward that all kinds of things become possible.
Yeah, mine is similar. I think what gets me up in the morning is having the privilege of seeing what happens when we work together. And whether it's workers organizing and being respected for their humanity, whether it is a community that has fought for decades and their rights are finally recognized. I think that there is a shift that I'm feeling now around, and you mentioned in some of the spaces, like the coming together. When we don't allow ourselves to be siloed by corporations or big structures saying, no, you work on this issue and you work on a different issue and you work on something else. It'd be great for us if you all stayed disconnected and didn't actually have enough power to take us down. I think that's shifting. And I think more and more people are saying, no, we don't buy it. We don't want to play the game anymore. And so what we're getting now is just a taste of what is to come. We have this shared taste of what's possible, and we see these small steps, and that will, soon we'll take a bite, and then we'll take a bigger bite, and then before you know, the meal is gone, and we're all fed together, and that's probably a terrible analogy, but it's a beautiful concept, I think, that we're seeing this coming together across different movements, and that's what gets me up in the morning.
Awesome.